Drive was actually an experience that was completely different than any other I had had before. Specifically, I have, in the last 5 or 6 years, come back to actually doing a lot of hands-on work, designing and mixing, whereas in the late 90s and the early part of 2000, there was a lot of oversight of bigger crews doing work and then having review sessions, etc. And in the last 5 or 6 years, I've gotten involved actually doing the work that is done by our designers and doing the mixing and doing the leveling in conjunction with the final mix. And in this case, I had our director, Nick Reffin, in the studio with me for several days going through the movie and really blocking out how it was going to sound and taking things in, taking things out, and coming up with new things. And as opposed to sort of standard process of having reviews and then going away and coming back and have other reviews, he just said, why don't you just fix that? We'll change this thing. And I said, great. And I started taking note. He said, no, I'll just hang out here. I'll hang out with you. And he said, I'll just make a phone call. And so that was the beginning of several days of spending full days with him, which was a new experience for me and a wonderful experience. It's the way most film editors work. But sound is usually not given that much attention. And often because directors don't have the time because of a lot of simultaneous activities like color timing, digital intermediates, and visual effects happening. But Nick was really intent on that process, and it gave me a clear direction that was new, and which was a very minimalist approach. One of the most unique things about Drive, and the biggest challenges to wrap my head around as someone that's done a lot of bigger studio movies, was going into a world that's singular and does not have many layers in it. It's singular and it's laser pointed to what's happening at the moment. And that was a new thing for me, because most of the studio movies that come out of Hollywood purposely have a lot of density and a lot of richness and a lot of fullness in the soundtrack. And there's a lot of dimension to them in terms of backgrounds and offstage scenarios and things happening. And in this case, this director said, no, I don't want anything that's offstage that isn't in the character's perception of what he's doing in a given scene at a given moment. And that's why Drive is so stark. And in its starkness, it's so engaging, because there's nothing to take you away from the intensity of whatever is happening, whether it's the character's joy, whether it's his angst, whether it's his trying to escape something. And that was a new experience, a wonderful experience for me.
I agree. That kind of distinguishes the movie for me too. But so that's an unusual dynamic for you to actually have the director there with you. Do you find that directors generally have a clear understanding of sound and what it means to their film?
Some do, and some have less of an understanding. We work in a really subtle subtext. I think that someone once said, we're putting freckles on the face of the doll. But and that refers to the little details that we work in. But in fact, the subtext of the sound is so important in terms of creating the mood and pushing the story forward and giving the characters things to put them in a space from an oral perspective. And some directors are excited about it. I'm currently doing The Hunger Games, and Gary Ross, our director, did the same thing, actually. He spent many, many days with me, and we went through and we organized in the same way how the movie was going to sound. So now that I know how to do that, and I'm more comfortable doing it, just from a personal standpoint, I would try and get more and more directors to do that.
Yeah,
and that was part of that experience. Was like at first when Nick said, "I'll just stay here, I'll be on the phone." I said, "I'm not used to doing this with someone here next to me," and it turned out to be fine. And it was just a real fun evolution for me, because it was a really great time.
Yeah, is there a particular scene or sequence in Drive that you watch with particular pride, that stands out to you in terms of the work that you did?
there's many sequences in that film that I find are just so interesting. I guess one of the, well, there's so many, but starting even at the beginning of the movie, the idea when he's escaping from the first robbery, and you normally would think that, you know, he would take off and the engines would be roaring and he would be trying to escape, but in fact, he's like a fish surrounded by sharks, which are the police. And when driver first leaves, you know, instead of having the engines roar and all that, there's just virtually no engine sounds. There's just the sound of the tires, and he's going super slow and just pulls in behind a truck, and we see the police in the distance, and all you hear is the sound of the tires of the police car and it banging on a manhole cover, which I put in. And, you know, it lasers in on just what his perception is and how quiet it is. And it continues in this quiet mode until he's seen by this police helicopter. And once he's seen, everything goes berserk, and the sound just blasts in with the helicopter, and the score that Cliff Martinez did builds and builds, and then lets this moment happen where he's just under the gun, and you feel under the gun of the audience, and then it quiets down again when he hides underneath. You know, so it changes as he changes his scene. He hides under an aqueduct, and you feel this helicopter go all around you and surround you, and it disappears and just super quiet again. And then the pulse of Clint's score starts up again.
Roger, 1 out of 3. Requesting air unit support. Dispatch, air to inbound. I got eyes on. Unit 5 to dispatch. Heading eastbound on 6. Copy that, Unit 5. Base to Air 3. Any sign of that Silver Impala? Air 3 to base. Negative. Got a visual on heading west on 7th Street Bridge. Copy, Air 3.
Everyone loves the car chase sequence in Drive after the pawn shop
Right.
heist. And one of the interesting things about that was when I first started, I said to Nick, you know, we did the research on the cars and what kind of engines they should have and all that. And I talked with Nick and said, so you want them to have this kind of engine, this and that? And he said, you know, I don't really care what kind of engines they are. I don't even have a driver's license. I've never driven a car.
Yeah.
I said, really? He said, really? I don't drive. He said, so make it exciting and don't pay attention to anything having to do with reality. And in fact, you see in the sequence, if you look closely, you will see that Ryan Gosling, in a number of places, has his right hand on the steering wheel, where he couldn't possibly be shifting. Yet we have him shifting up, shifting down, things are happening. And all of this was out of Nick saying, refer to the race through Paris that Claude Lelouch did in 1976, which is the point of view of a car racing through the streets of Paris, which is an amazing film, by the way. Listeners should check it out. And you just think this car's flying around the streets and this and that. And in fact, the car was going 35 miles an hour, and all the shifting and skidding and all the sounds is what made it seem incredible. And so we did the same thing, and it just was something totally new for us and for me, because, you know, there's so much intention to be real and to be proper, et cetera, in most movies when it comes to, like, a car chase sound or something like that. And you would never do something like that where distinctly, you know, the sound could not be happening in a reality-based scene like that.
Yeah.
And it was just fun to do that because no one's ever noticed.
Well, and I think
get excited.
I think of Drive, and I think about how kind of transfixing it is, and I think it goes along with how you're describing the soundscape of that initial sequence, is that it lulls you, it transfixes and hypnotizes you in a way. and then just abruptly with the kind of the violence or the scenes of action. I mean, that's what I think of with Drive. And so
it does. The
yeah.
whole piece, the whole film has a lulling nature to it that is a handshake, really a creative handshake between the Clint Martinez score and the sound design pieces that we put in, where you can't tell which is which, but it doesn't matter because it's all part of, like you say, this sense of just being lulled into a place that you suspend your sense of any other reality, and even you start thinking about what are they saying and what's going on between them, because there's very little dialogue in the film too. And that's another way to have the audience just go into it, and they have, which has been such a wonderful thing to see as the film came out, and as, you know, some people thought, well, it's not the action film it should be, or it doesn't, you know, it's supposed to be about a stunt guy and a guy that does heists, and it should be all action. And much to everyone's surprise, except our director, who knew all along, and the film editor, Matt Newman, it was like, this will draw people in. And it has, as we can see from how it's been received. It's just a lot of people, even yesterday at the nominations launch, people were saying, this is the best movie I've seen all year.
Wow.
And I think that surprised a lot of people.
It is a singular experience. But hearing you describe the kind of the thought process and how it ties in with character and the situations of a particular scene when you're designing the sound, I mean, it makes me think about every person on a film crew is really an assistant storyteller. And I don't think people realize that enough. Have you always kind of had a strong sense of story?
Always.
Yeah.
I mean, my sense of story is the reason I even got into this industry in the first place. I was so influenced as a kid by, you know, some of the great shows, you know, like Wild Wild West and Lost in Space, which was, you know, the shows that were on TV in the 60s. And I just was always taken by the stories that they conveyed and how you know, experience what the characters experienced, and you could sort of leave your daily life, and as a kid, if you were just, you know, not that popular or not this or whatever, and you could just go into these characters. And that's why I even got into this industry, was to communicate ideas. And I, just for one reason or another, it's a circuitous story, but ended up in the sound world as an 18-year-old with a sound company called Sound Deluxe that we started 30-some-odd years ago. And we've been telling stories ever since. And you learn that early on, that the key is to push forward the story points and create arcs in the story sonically, like a musical score. Because it is like a musical score. It's subtextual, and the orchestrations that are found in any type of music, the subtext of those things besides the main melody are all supporting that melody.
Yeah.
And that's what we do all the time.